All right, welcome back, everyone. So, some big stories to go into, as has been the case lately. If there's one thing that's defining 2021, it's certainly not a lack of big news. So, first of all, we've gotten some leaked documents out of China, which shows the Chinese Communist Party is giving alerts, warnings to different branches of the government throughout the entire country, telling them to prepare for a new virus outbreak. Now, interpret this as you will. I'll go over the details of that document, what they're saying. Could be they're doing something else entirely. Could be they're trying to start another crisis. It could be that they're actually having a serious virus outbreak, or they're predicting something in China. I'll give you the details on that, exactly what they're saying, in just a bit. Also, folks, I mentioned a little bit before a couple different issues. One is that here in the United States, there's now an oil shortage. Now, remember under Trump, the United States became a net oil producer to the point where we could export it. We were exporting oil. Biden eliminated those programs. He's now made it so that, well, we have to import oil from Saudi Arabia, other countries. And we're now seeing something happen in the United States, but I want to explain the bigger picture of this. In the United States now, we have a shortage of oil to the extent that the federal government has to actually tap the reserves that we have. Simultaneously, in different parts of the world, you have a coal shortage and other shortages in energy materials, whether it be natural gas or whatever. Coal is one of the big ones in China and in other countries. In China right now, because of the heavy rains, the coal mining areas are flooded. They can't mine coal. Australia is not exporting it like it used to. India is even having issues now, and this is causing rolling blackouts. Other parts of the world, Europe as well, also having issues with energy. I'll be explaining some of the different details with this and what the real implications of this are, especially as we get ready for winter, and especially as it's already getting quite cold in some northern regions, including parts of China, and you have blackouts combined with factory shutdowns, combined with some other issues we'll be touching on. It's not looking so hot for a lot of people, let's put it that way. Also, folks, Bill Maher is warning that Trump may win in 2024. I'll be explaining what Bill Maher is talking about, why he's saying this, and other details on that. Also, Trump seems to be pretty confident as well that if a big victory is coming for Republicans. I'll be giving the details on why they're saying this, why Trump is saying it, while even the people on the left are saying it. A lot going on, folks. That said, good to see you all here. Real quick, so Brett Octane, you're saying, yo, pre-recorded? Hi, Josh. Now, we're not pre-recorded. We are fully live. Barbara Grill, you're saying, hey, what's up? Good to see you all. Danny, you said, gee, that's 3 years from now. Yeah, I know, right? Well, 1 year went by pretty quick. We'll have to see how it goes the next 3. Although 2022 elections coming up, the midterms, could see some big shifts take place in this country. We'll have to see how it goes. Elizabeth Valenzuela, you said Bill Maher is leaning right. Actually, I've heard a few people point that out, that Bill Maher, of course, he's HBO show host. He tends to be pretty far left generally, but he actually has been at least showing some opinions on the right lately, which has been interesting to watch. All right, folks, let's get into the first story for the night. As always, as well, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them around the halfway point. Now, first off here, China is bracing for a possible large-scale COVID-19 outbreak, according to leaked documents for the Chinese Communist Party. Now, it says here, the Chinese regime, and I'll explain why this matters, the Chinese regime has notified local authorities to prepare for a large-scale outbreak of COVID-19, according to leaked internal documents obtained by the Chinese edition of the Epoch Times. One document, titled Notice of Further Strengthening of Epidemic Prevention, was issued by the Chinese regime's State Council, technically their government still under the CCP, and was forwarded by Fujian provincial governments to local authorities on September 30th. The other document is a National Day Epidemic Prevention Notice, issued also by the State Council on October 1st, and distributed by the Fujian provincial officials to local authorities. The documents are both marked extra urgent. Both notices request enhanced preparations for what they say, right? Enhanced preparations for an emergency response to the outbreak, with the Chinese Communist Party putting forward at least 2 standards for local authorities. Now, take it for what it's worth. Of course, a lot of people pointed to what the CCP did last year. I'll go this a bit more, but last year, the Chinese Communist Party was, of course, issuing similar warnings internally while lying to the world externally, saying that there was nothing to worry about. They had it under control. Meanwhile, they seeded the virus to every part of the world. The Chinese Communist Party did intentionally seed the virus by shutting down travel within China, but allowing travel outside of China. Meanwhile, they cornered the market on PPE, personal protective equipment, and also began doing what they call like a mask diplomacy, using their monopoly they had on face masks and other things as a way to win diplomatic gains. Now, the CCP is doing the same thing. Take it for what it's worth in terms of whether you believe this is legitimate or not. Your guess is as good as mine when it comes to this. Whether, of course, they're warning about a real new outbreak or whether it's just them trying to posture things for greater control within the country. The important part, though, here, whether outbreak or not, is one, the U.S. and the whole world should be prepared for either the Chinese Communist Party locking down again, which is happening right at the time where not just the Chinese economy, but the global economy is about to take a huge hit from, again, the Chinese housing market collapsing, from the shipping crisis you have happening right now, which is leading to the transportation crisis here in the U.S., infecting consumer goods. A lot of issues that are going to be affected by this as we go into this state of crisis in addition to all this. At the same time, this is happening while they are rolling blackouts in China, which I'll be getting into, which is, again, also going to affect the shipping crisis, which is really going to affect economies around the world as well. Things are not looking so hot, let's put it that way. Let's detail what the CCP is doing. Now, it says with the orders the CCP is giving internally, one is to build central isolation sites. You hear that? With local authorities required by the end of October to create facilities of no less than 20 rooms for 10,000 people. 20 rooms per 10,000 people. That, folks. Now, a lot of people are talking about whether they're going to have these camps essentially for people, who knows whether this for the vaccinated or the unvaccinated, or for people who are infected in China, folks. The CCP is giving orders to begin doing this. Again, they're going to be creating facilities of no less than 20 rooms for every 10,000 people. Now, the scale of each isolation site must be more than 100 rooms. According to public data, the population of Fujian province in 2020 was 41.54 million. In other words, the CCP, whether for legitimate treatment or otherwise, is creating essentially concentration camps. Call them whatever you want. They're building them. Now, remember last year in, again, Hunan province, Wuhan, which Wuhan is in Hunan province, which was the epicenter of the virus. The CCP actually did something similar. They did create hospitals for people to have treatment for the virus. The problem they had in the hospitals was, well, first off, it was right by the water supply, meaning that there was risk of infection through the water supply. And second, they built it so quickly that it wasn't able to contain anything. The hospitals themselves, the ones they built at least, became essentially like super spreader sites, was the big concern. They're doing the same thing again now. And they're building new ones, or giving orders again in different parts of the country to build these. As of September 19th, the province, Fujian province, has already set up 35,691 quarantine rooms in 296 central sites. Based on the standard data set in the notice, Fujian province will need to build at least 83,000 quarantine rooms by the end of October, which is about 47,000 rooms in less than a month. Now, maybe that's a way to keep these mega projects going, right? Because again, their real estate market's about to implode, basically. Maybe they have to build these quarantine sites for it. Now, briefly, before I'm going to go just a bit more into this, but briefly, there have been photos and videos of these rooms, and they essentially look like prisons. It's a little prison cell type room, a door you can't get out of. They're essentially prison camps. It's the way they work in China. And there have been reports of people not really being properly, not only treated at these types of sites, but even not even being properly fed well, let alone basic access to things like toilets and so on. These are some of the issues you had last year. Also, some photos and videos from the ground in China suggest that this problem hasn't really lifted. Now, I'll get briefly into the significance of this, but a couple more points. It says this. This is an actual quote. It says, "Notice of further strengthening of epidemic prevention." This says it requires the establishment of a 5-layered control system. 5-layered control system. It states township and street CCP cadres, Chinese Communist Party cadres, community grid staff, grassroots medical workers, police, and volunteers shall jointly implement community epidemic prevention. Think about what that means. Community prevention, meaning tell on your neighbor prevention, meaning possibly locking down communities type prevention, which they did do last year. And this includes, they say, strictly implementing community prevention and control, or locking down, they say, residential communities, locking down entire communities. Now, remember briefly on this. Now, this is China, but the significance of it is this. The model the CCP used last year to treat this virus, we were watching it from a distance, mask mandates, economic shutdowns, cities on lockdown, people, quarantining in their homes, all of these things. And we were looking at it and saying, wow, I'm glad that's not us. Well, folks, it became us because the world adopted the Chinese Communist Party's model for dealing with the virus. The World Health Organization, which was acting like a sock puppet of the CCP, was repeating that the CCP's methods were working, and different governments using the information from the World Health Organization, which was repeating the lies of the Chinese Communist Party, was again spreading the CCP model. Now we're watching this happen again, only now it's a new form of model. It's now quarantine sites. It's now camps. It is now things like community lockdowns, locking down entire community areas. Now, this does sound far-fetched, that it could come to other parts of the world. Keep in mind, though, that even in the United States, I can't remember if it was the FDA or FEMA, we went over a document. I showed you the original document on it during a recent episode, where they were discussing the possibility of having camps here in the United States. Now, it was a proposal document discussing possibilities, not a proposal, something they were saying they were going to be doing, but it mentioned 3 different layers. The first layer is the one we actually already had, which is forced quarantine within your own home. They did implement stage 1. Stage 2 would be communal lockdowns, which the Chinese Communist Party is now talking about as this year's program. Stage 3 would be actual camps, which the CCP is also talking about as this year's program. Now, we'll have to see what happens with this. Watch for, again, organizations close to the Chinese Communist Party trying to praise the CCP's model for dealing with it. That's what happened last year. Even publications like New York Times and others were praising the Chinese Communist Party's model of state capitalism, read socialism. State controls the means of production, i.e. capitalism, socialism, right? They were praising the CCP's model of state capitalism as something for the world to replicate and saying, oh, look at how well they can do things. Look at how well they can lock down. They have it under control. They didn't. But again, its model, regardless of that, using these false narratives, was used to justify the spreads of these programs. Get ready for it, folks. We'll see how it goes, but this is the CCP's model for this year, it appears, and we'll see whether the other countries also adopt it, because that's what happened last year. All right, folks, that said, I mentioned before, we're still totally demonetized by YouTube. Luckily, though, we do have sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by Secure. Now, over 155 million Americans were affected by data leaks in 2020, last year. The average American had their personal data stolen 4 times over that past year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data or their online activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure, that's S-E-K-U-R, that can give genuine privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, and Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Even if the U.S. government were to ask them for your data, They would not only have to go through a long process to do it, but they'd also have to alert you. It's very, very good security there. Also, folks, Secure is the only private and secure messaging and email app that does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, which also means, in addition to those companies monitoring your data, it also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act, which any company that is a signatory on could expose your data through as well. Secure does not ask for your phone number, does not mine your data, and does not upload your contacts like all other applications of this type do. Secure Messenger functions by adding people you know and then adding their secure numbers. You can also chat with non-secure users by sending them an invite. And using this, folks, you can chat again with them as well very easily. In this way, you're protected from hackers getting onto your phone. You have full privacy while on the app, and it's only $5 for the Messenger and only $10 for the email and Messenger package. You can visit secure.com today, SEKUR.com, for a free 7-day trial, or you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode, helping us keep the show going. And thanks to y'all as well for your ongoing support as well. All right, folks, I want to go into a few more stories. I want to talk about what's happening with this energy crisis that is now upon us and some significant things happening in China amidst all this. Folks, something big is happening. Whether intentional or unintentional, there's a huge shakeup going on. One that is not just impacting China, but does have China as kind of the main stage of this. I'll be detailing this in just a bit. Also, folks, if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. Around the halfway point, we'll get to them. Also, those of you curious, the tea for the night is Greek mountain tea, which is wonderful. I highly recommend it. Those of you interested in making it at home, side note, you get the Greek mountain tea, you boil it, and then let it simmer for 10 minutes, put honey in it. It's fantastic. Not very well known, but very popular in Greece. All right, folks, let's talk about this energy crisis and where things are heading with it. I'll start with what's happening in China and then move to the rest of the world, because this is not just China. This is the United States. This is Europe. This is India. This is all parts of the world. There's a huge energy crisis right on the horizon, right as we're having all these economic troubles. Consider these things in conjunction with each other, and I'll explain how they relate. Now, it says here, first off, in China, heavy rain has shut down 60 coal mines in China's top coal-producing region, as they're already having blackouts across the country. As already the blackouts are so bad that it's shutting down Chinese factories and affecting even shipping in the United States. You might notice trying to buy things online or trying to buy things in stores, either the prices are higher or that it's very hard to find things or they're backlogged. This is part of the reason why. A few different factors, this is part of it. Now it says here, torrential rain that lasted for almost 5 days straight has forced China's coal hub to close 60 coal mines, piling further pressure on the country already grappling with a power crunch. The downpour that struck 11 cities in northern China's Shanxi province has triggered flooding and landslides, destroying railway lines and bridges and causing many deaths as well. The provincial weather agency said on October 10th that showers will continue the next 10 days. 10 days of rain, folks, heavy like this. Heavy rain beginning on October 2nd has suspended 60 coal mines, 372 other mines, 14 hazardous chemical enterprises, and over 1,000 constructing projects. As again, they're having, shipping crisis, energy crisis, and housing market crisis. I'll explain again how these relate in just a bit. Now, the Shanxi government itself noted this in an October 8th notice. And typically, if local Chinese officials give a notice like this, it's either really serious or they're downplaying it, meaning it's probably a lot worse than what they're stating publicly. The halts, all these things as well, are laying additional stress on the country as it scrambles to produce more coal to stem a deepening power crisis. Shanxi, where these crises are now taking place, is the country's top coal-producing province, with production accounting for more than a quarter of the national total in 2020. In other words, a quarter of coal in China comes from this province. Around 2/3 of the country's electricity comes from burning coal. Consider that also as winter is on the horizon. The crisis has led to power rationing in more than half of China's provinces over the past few weeks. The electricity cuts have also disrupted daily life for tens of millions of people, crippled industrial output, i.e. factories, and wreaked havoc on global supply chains. Days before the extreme weather, Shanxi signed contracts to commit coal supplies to the winter times to 14 provinces across the country. In other words, folks, they were relying on Shanxi province to prepare coal to give enough energy for winter when winter hits. And Shanxi, the place that was going to do that, is the one getting hit by this right now. And that includes also northeastern Liaoning province state-run news outlet Xinhua said on September 29th. In other words, it's gotten worse since then. People living in that province and two neighboring provinces where the temperature drops to 51 degrees Fahrenheit in October have recently experienced unannounced electricity cuts in their homes, meaning no heat. Residents also complained about traffic lights being turned off, weak network signals, and lack of heating. As winter's peak consumption approaches, Beijing has urged top miners to boost coal output. Now, I'm going to be explaining a few different facets to this. I want to talk about a bit more with the energy facet, but I want to explain a bit how this relates to the economy first. Because, folks, consider this in context of a few things. Consider it in context of the coming winter. Well, obviously, again, we're already mid-October, close to. And again, if you're having energy crisis in a lot of countries where it gets freezing, well, people need energy to stay alive in very cold places of the world. Consider as well factory shutdowns. Consider as well the new virus outbreak, as the CCP is claiming is happening, and which also means, I should note, more economic shutdowns. In other words, if you're going to be quarantining people, again, 20 units for every 10,000 people, quarantines, communal lockdowns, which they're talking about, think of that in context, not just of what they're saying, a new virus outbreak. Think of that in context as well of how many people are going to be out of work while they're quarantined, how many more businesses are going to be shut down because people either have the virus allegedly or they're shut down for other reasons. And consider as well this in relation to the housing bubble, which is getting a whole lot worse. Now, everyone's talking about one Chinese real estate company. That one Chinese real estate company is like the tip of the spear. It's a drop of sand in a desert, folks. It's one small piece of a very large picture. And let me explain where things are at with that, because this is going to impact the entire global economy. And it's not at a level that can be bailed out even by the CCP. And even if they're lying about their finances, even if they're printing money around the clock, they cannot fix this. Let me explain. Now, it says here, this is Zero Hedge. It says catastrophic property sales mean China's worst case scenario is now in play. As imagined by Goldman Sachs, the worst possible thing that could happen economically to a country is now happening in China, at least when it comes to the housing markets. Let me explain. Now, I won't read the whole thing. I'll start a bit further in, but it says here, any contagion from the ongoing turmoil sweeping China's heavily indebted property sector will impact not the banks, which are all state-owned entities, and whose exposure to insolvent developers can easily be patched by the state. A lot of people are thinking, oh, the banks can bail them out. That's one part of it. They're keeping this in mind as they note that the CCP is basically facing like the ultimate economic crisis, basically. This affects not just that, but the property sector itself, which, as Goldman Sachs recently calculated, is worth $62 trillion, making it the world's largest asset class. And that, folks, the largest asset class in the world, $62 trillion, is about to go belly up. And as again, this isn't just the Chinese stock exchange. This is all these Western investors, all these businesses with ties to China, financial ties and so on, all getting hit simultaneously by this. Get ready for the storm with this. Let me explain. Now, This contributes a mind-boggling 29% of China's GDP, compared to 6.2% in the US, which would be the housing market here in the US, and represents 62% of household wealth. Now, I'm going to skip forward a bit. I want to go over this whole thing, but it says a quick update on Evergrande, which is the big Chinese real estate company everybody's talking about. The big one that's about to go under, again, it's much bigger than just Evergrande, but even Evergrande alone would have a global economic impact. Now, again, a quick update on Evergrande, which to nobody's surprise, we learned today is expected to default. It's happening. It's happening, folks. It's expected to default on its offshore bond payment obligations imminently. And with that background in mind, let's move to the truly chilling latest development. It now appears that China does not need Evergrande to officially default to unleash a property crisis. One has already arrived. This is not just China's market, folks. This is the entire central global stock exchange. Let me explain. Now, again, I won't go over this whole story. It's very complicated. It gets into a lot of the minute details of economy. It's a bit of a headache if you want to read through the whole thing. You can check it out. But let me focus on the main part here. Now, it lays out what is considered the worst case scenario. Goldman Sachs has a list a few years back of worst case scenarios that could happen to China economically in terms of people who are invested there and so on, right? This is them worried about their money and so on, right? Worst case scenario, which they call scenario 3. Now, folks, not only is China seeing everything within the worst case scenario, it's worse than the worst case scenario as imagined by Goldman Sachs. And it says here, we had to do a double take when we saw this, because these are absolutely terrifying numbers and are, to put it bluntly, scarier than Goldman's worst case scenario. What's worse, this sudden collapse in China's property market is taking place before Evergrande has even defaulted. In other words, the wall is falling down, folks. It's crumbling around Evergrande. Everyone's focused on Evergrande. It's already crumbling. Now, before it's even defaulted, already this is happening. An event which would lead to a glacier freeze in the property market as potential buyers hold off expecting liquidation fire sales from the property giant in hopes of getting bargains. Now, why does this matter? It matters, folks. Well, on one side, I mean, for those of us who do not like the Chinese Communist Party, frankly, I'd say they're a genocidal regime, which justifies being treated like a genocidal totalitarian regime. It'd be good for the Chinese people the CCP collapsed. It looks like, at the very least, its economy is collapsing. This happens as the Chinese Communist Party is also threatening war, talking about, in fact, Xi Jinping himself, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, is even right now talking about how they will have reunification with Taiwan. Reunification is the word they use for conquering Taiwan. They regard Taiwan as part of China. Keep in mind, it's a bit ridiculous because the Kuomintang, which was the official government of China prior to the CCP's takeover, fled to Taiwan, the island of Formosa, and was regarded by the United States and other countries for a good while as the official government of China. The CCP was considered the illegitimate government. But things shifted. The United Nations recognized China. The U.S. unfortunately followed suit. And now the CCP is saying they need to basically take over Taiwan to reunify. Now, Taiwan is saying they will defend themselves if that happens. Japan is suggesting it might defend Taiwan if that happens. The U.S. is again in a defensive coalition with Japan, India, and Australia under the Quad Alliance. Folks, it's heating up. And what's the main way that you typically, well, try to save a failing party, a failing regime, a collapsing economy? Well, I wouldn't rule out war for the CCP. This is in addition to the fact that very likely this could impact pretty much the entire global economy. Now, close to 30%, I think 29% of China's economy is in real estate. Another 20-something% is in export economy. With the factories shut down, with the tariffs, with other things, the CCP's export economy is also falling apart. As I mentioned, the CCP was going to very likely try to put pressure on the U.S. to lift Trump's tariffs, which are, again, putting that chokehold on the CCP's economy on the export side. As we speak right now, the Chinese Communist Party has begun doing that. They're lobbying and calling on the U.S. to lift those tariffs. It's happening. The chances of them doing that and the chances of that even saving the Chinese economy right now are very slim, because even manufacturing with China shut down, again, because of many other factors. Everything is falling apart, no remedy in sight. Weather itself is acting against them, things beyond the control of the CCP, all acting against them. And it's going to have a big impact here as well, folks. Get ready for some big hits on the stock exchange, very, very likely, and very, very soon. Now, as we talk about this, I mentioned, I'll get into questions just a bit, but I want to go over a bit more what's happening with this energy crisis as it relates to this. Now, as again, you're having this energy crisis take place in China. They're having shortages of coal. This happens right as winter is about to be rolling in. And also is happening right when the CCP needs to basically have some kind of economy, which, folks, if their factories don't run, imagine production is done in China, essentially right now. Production is out of the picture, as is the housing development, meaning close to half of China's GDP is done, essentially, right now. At the same time, they import most of their food from Brazil. Brazilians are talking about possible food shortages as they face this. But we'll see, even if Brazil chooses to export still, again, as you have global shipping basically at a standstill. It's not looking hot for them right now. Let me explain the global picture, then I'll go into questions. Now, India right now is also facing rolling blackouts as coal shortages force power plants to adopt emergency measures. I won't go too deep into this, but essentially, they're saying that around, again, more than half of India's 135 coal-fired power plants supply around 70% of the country's electricity. Typically, they have about 30 days backup. Now it's down to 1 day. In other words, this coal shortage is not just in China, it's global. And what does that mean? It means that not only are you going to have an energy crisis in other parts of the world, India, China, two of the biggest producers, two of the biggest countries population-wise, but also, folks, it means that countries are very likely going to hold on to their assets, i.e. probably not exporting it that much because they need it domestically. We already see this happening and affecting China, which means countries that are having shortages are going to have to get through winter without that. At the same time, folks, here we have another story from Bloomberg, and it says energy crisis sets stage for record global carbon emissions, ironically, because again, part of the whole idea of getting rid of coal-fired power plants and nuclear plants is, again, concerns about the environment. It's actually having the opposite effect. Now, it says here, the energy crisis, the coming winter weather, and the release of pent-up pandemic demand has sent nations scrambling to stockpile fossil fuels, as I was just discussing, a move that portends a rebound for global carbon dioxide emissions this year. The trajectory poses a new threat to the Paris Agreement goal of limiting global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius, trying to fight global warming, as they claim. It's having the opposite effect, again, because of the restrictions they place in the global energy markets. China, India, and other developing economies are driving the demand for coal. But even the United States is poised to increase its consumption of the dirtiest fossil fuel in almost a decade, according to a forecast from the International Energy Association. And folks, this isn't just coal, it's other things as well, even oil. Again, in the United States, we were a net producer of oil. We were exporting it under Trump. Biden ended that program. We're now having a crisis as well with oil supplies, to the extent that the United States is having to tap into reserves that we keep around for like wars or emergencies like this. In other words, when one country goes into a state of crisis, other countries can step in to help it. Other countries can help mitigate the problem. When it's a global problem, to the extent that every country has to keep their own stockpiles, meaning they can't export it, it means that countries that are in the most serious forms of crisis or don't have proper stockpiles are going to be in for serious, serious issues. And again, folks, this is happening as we roll into winter. And again, even if you don't consider it in terms of basic heating for households, consider it in context, again, of global production, manufacturing, food supplies, transportation, global shipping, and so on. This is where we're heading, folks. This is on the horizon. Now, I want to go into some questions in a bit, so do stick around. Folks, I have mentioned before, though, we are still, again, demonetized by YouTube, but we have started our own video platform. That's Epic TV. That's epochtv.com/Crossroads. You can find the link to that in the description below or in the chat. And those of you watching on Epic TV, thank you for your support. Folks, I recently finished producing the first season, I guess you could say. We'll see if we do more. I'd like to. Of the Dark Origins of Communism. This is a series, roughly 10-minute episodes, detailing a lot of forgotten or unknown history of communism globally and really explaining its nature. The 5th episode is now online on Epic TV. Be sure to check it out. We have a link again in the description, so check it out. I'll show you a quick trailer now of what we've been working on with it. Under the communist system of dialectical materialism, everything in the universe amounts to nothing more than matter in motion. That means you and I are only clumps of physical cells. Our souls, emotions, mental health, and well-being are not part of the communist equation. Like how the moderate Girondins were among the first to die in the French Revolution, or how moderate Democrats are shut out by the Democratic Socialists of America. Communism favors the extremes. In traditional culture, it is two opposite elements working together in harmony to form a whole. However, this was inversed under the Chinese Communist Party. In the selected works of Mao Zedong, the yin-yang, which is normally a whole, is split into two, with each side constantly fighting and struggling against the other. In either the Eastern or Western spiritual view of the world, the course of human life serves to temper the character of the soul. An atheistic, materialistic reading of the world is that only matter or progress exists. Communism does not want you to have a soul. All right, folks, again, check that out. The link is in the description below. Be sure to check it out. Again, that's on Epic TV exclusively. And even if you don't have an account, you can get a free trial, 7 episodes, I believe, for all you need is an email address. And if you want to subscribe, you can get a subscription for the cost of a gallon of gas in California. I used to say that half jokingly, but now it's actually true. So anyway, all right, folks, that says let's jump into questions now. First question up is from Truth Seeker. He said, Joshua, do they appear to you to be wagging a new tail to avoid fiscal accountability and retain control? It could be the case. It could be the case that the Chinese Communist Party is just trying to hold on to power. This does fall in line with some of what we were discussing last year. If you remember, those of you who were watching my show last year when I was doing a lot of China reporting, the CCP actually did lay out a plan at that time, which was not widely talked about at all. The CCP was facing crisis when the virus outbreak was starting. They were facing, again, Trump's tariffs. They were facing disasters throughout the country. They were facing virus lockdowns, other things. The CCP itself was under assault internally and externally. You had the Hong Kong protests still taking place. The CCP was afraid of that spreading into the mainland of China, that there'd be anti-communist party protests throughout China. The CCP was in a state of crisis, and for the CCP, pretty much its only priority is the survival of the Chinese Communist Party. As long as the CCP survives, that's all they care about. If they have to kill 95% of the Chinese population so that the CCP can survive, they would do it. The proposal at that time, as we discussed last year, and this wasn't secret, this was public reporting, in China at least. The proposal at that time by many heads of the Chinese Communist Party was to essentially redo the Cultural Revolution, to lock down the borders, shut down China, basically say the whole world is against us. We're in conflict with the whole world, war, whatever they wanted to do. And this is what they were talking about internally last year. war or whatever else. We have enemies surrounding us. We need to lock it down, focus internally, basically redo purges. Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, has already announced these purges, renaming it, in fact, after the same internal Communist Party purge that led to the rise of Mao Zedong to becoming chairman of the CCP, even using the same name. They're already doing it. Included locking down the economies. The CCP is already doing it. They now have this Xi vision of economic reform, basically rolling back the clock to a more Mao Zedong type economic system. It included locking down China and redoing, again, the Cultural Revolution. Well, folks, aren't they building these camps? Aren't they talking about lockdowns yet again? Aren't they justifying a lot of these social control systems, like the social credit system and health codes, again, using the virus and vaccine passports as part of that? Yes. Whether intentional or not, whether this is real or not, they are using it in this way. The CCP has a saying, within crisis, there is opportunity. Within crisis, there is opportunity. And the CCP is talking about openly, they're explaining the global virus situation as a World War III scenario. And to put this in proper context, they say they're not hiding this, they're saying it. They're saying that basically World War I and World War II recreated the global world order. Both of them, both world wars, remade global politics, remade the world. And they're saying that the virus situation is having that same effect. It is remaking global politics, remaking the world. And the CCP is saying, again, in context of that, within crisis is opportunity. And they see this as a chance to export their model for dealing with things, which the world, as we speak, is adopting, whether knowingly or not. Again, the lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine passports, and other measures being promoted, including social control systems like the social credit system, being implemented in different parts of the world. Australia is a fantastic, unfortunate example of this. It is happening, folks. Next question here from Candace Perkins. He said, Josh, how do you think the Evergrande failure in China will affect U.S. economy, as the parent company that owns BlackRock and BlackRock Stone owned the majority of their equity? Question. Well, interesting story here. Remember that George Soros himself very recently advised, I believe it was BlackRock, to divest from China. Maybe he saw the writing on the wall, which is an interesting development that even Soros, an individual who a lot of people on the right especially don't like very much, is urging companies to pull out of China. It does seem, I mean, take it as you will. One possible way to think about this is that Soros types and, the Build Back Better types and World Economic Forum and, the Great Restart, whatever they want to call it, Build Back Better, Great Restart, Green New Deal type stuff, whatever you want to call it. CCP's idea of within crisis, there's opportunity, remaking of global orders. There's a lot of different competing groups that have similar ideas about the current crisis, and different groups believing that the current crisis can be manipulated for their own interests. These groups don't always see eye to eye. It's possible that there's some break taking place within finance, and the CCP is breaking away from these organizations. It's possible that they're helping make this landslide essentially speed up. It's possible they want this collapse. It's also possible they don't want it because it could possibly derail a lot of what they want to do. In particular, just as a bit of context with this, in the United States, we have hit the debt ceiling. You might have seen articles saying Republicans agreed to extend it. They have not given up on the debt ceiling. They've extended discussions on it until December and delayed it. But they're now saying, the Republicans, that they're not going to pass it. The only way that they could pass it to get the debt ceiling through would be if Democrats do reconciliation, which means basically they bypass the filibuster, bypass Republicans, which would mean that if Republicans do win 2022, they might do the same thing to Democrats, which they don't want. In the U.S., that means that instead of having a $6 trillion budget and $3.5 trillion spending programs for Green New Deal type programs and the $1.1-ish trillion or 1.5, whatever it is now, trillion-dollar infrastructure bill, which is basically based around Green New Deal type policies, that they'd have to cancel all those additional things they'd like to have and instead focus on basic needs of the country, meaning an economic crisis right now, it actually does not help them. An economic crisis really puts a huge damper on their interests in remaking the global system, especially here in the United States. It would mean that a lot of the programs they want to put in place would not be possible, at least for a little bit. And so we'll have to see. I personally, based on this, do not think that it's in their interest to have a global economic crisis. Although, who knows? Part of the whole communist idea, which a lot of people forget about, is, socialism was never designed to last. Marx talked about the 5 stages of civilization, primitive communism, right? We talk about this in the new documentary. Check out episode 5, again, The Dark Origins of Communism on Epic TV. But Marx talked about 5 stages of civilization. Primitive communism, i.e. like cavemen or whatever. The agrarian society, farmers and so on. The capitalist society, the free trade and markets and everybody is able to have private property. The socialist state, which is where the government becomes tyrannical, seizes the means of production, and is able to use its absolute dominance over society to drive forward the communist goal, which is desolation. The desolation of morals, desolation of tradition, desolation of religion, desolation of the economic systems, desolation of, government. The irony of socialism, the totalitarian state capitalism, state controls the means of capitalism, means of production, right? The ironic part of it was never designed to work. Communism exists through the negation of the negation of existing systems, as they would call it. It exists through desolation. And so maybe this is what they want. Maybe it's unintentionally what they're creating, or maybe, frankly, it's putting a damper on their plans before they can be fully realized. Frankly, right now, it's hard to tell which of these scenarios it is. But we are entering an interesting state of crisis. Global crisis, not just one country. This is global. Another question, a few of you are asking too about the U.S. One interesting thing about the United States is we're talking about food shortages and stuff like that. There's something very unique about the American character, which not many countries in the world have, which is for some reason Americans have this like prepper mentality. And it's totally normal. Those of you who aren't in the U.S., it's totally normal for Americans to sit around at the dinner table and talk about stockpiling food and like ammunition and stuff. It's totally normal here. I have conversations like this with family and friends, going back to when I was a kid. It's totally normal in the United States. Americans, in a funny way, actually do have this survivalist mentality. Maybe it's because, again, we were a frontier nation for a long time. We didn't have this idea of relying on a large social state. A lot of countries in the world, Europe, China, most countries, even parts of Latin America, went directly from having kings to having dictators. They went directly from having essentially socialist type systems, and a lot of the systems they had in England at the time of the founding of the United States, even through things like early Puritan policies here in the United States, things like the Mayflower Compact, were actually very socialist. The idea of that was the way most of the world went. America took an opposite approach, which is self-reliance. And a lot of Americans, just by the very nature of who we are, we have the tendency to stockpile and have stuff, basically in store for emergencies. And so America has a lot of resilience on that note, meaning it may not affect us as badly here, but in terms of, let's say, politics and global systems and global ambitions, it could actually have a big impact, which is going to be where it's going to be very interesting again to watch. I'll go over one more question, then I want to go into a few more stories because I want to talk about what's happening with Trump. Bill Maher himself talking about a possible Trump victory in 2024. Trump's having Trump rallies. I'd say at least suggesting the same thing. There may be a big turnaround, and it seems to be the case that, ironically, whether they mean to or not, all these problems are actually causing people to go to the Trump side. Frankly, I would say Trump is kind of like the global Trump card. hence his name, right? Trump is like the trump card to the global agenda that was basically being moved forward. We saw in the United States, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party weren't really different. In fact, I'd say the current political parties are absolutely different from what we had under Bush and Obama. Again, the Democrats and Republicans essentially became the same party. They are now the normal Democrat Party. The Bush-type Republicans all went to the Democrats. They did not anticipate this new movement that took place in the United States, like it or not, which has been the Trump effect. Trump took them by surprise and basically threw a wrench in whatever they wanted to do. Republicans and Democrats, the establishment types on either side of the aisle, did not like that because, frankly, a lot of the trajectory of where things were heading got derailed by this movement. And what's interesting now is that Trump has come to, whether you like him or not, he has come to recognize, or he has come to be recognized as essentially the symbol of this alternative global order, essentially. And as you're having global crisis sweep the world, it's actually pushing things in his direction, in that direction. There's a bit more context to this. One of the reasons why you're seeing this kind of shock and awe tactic, this scorched earth policy of labeling Trump supporters as domestic terrorists or whatever, right? January 6 narratives, nonstop propaganda around it, even though people who are getting sentenced are getting sentenced for like pretty minor trespassing sentences. One of the reasons you're having this is, remember the context after the January 6th incident, after Trump got left office and Biden took over. Part of the context of that was they said they had to purge the nation of this Trump effect, of this Trump phenomenon. And that was when they did start launching those types of policies under whatever narrative they wanted. Like them or not, that is what happened, right? But it seems to be the case that it's having the opposite effect. As the situation gets worse on the global scale, as it gets worse with what people are seeing with the lockdowns and the vaccine passports and this whole global system, there is now the context of another way of doing things. And without that context, very likely we would all be interpreting things within the vacuum of that particular state. Whatever dichotomy they wanted to create would be within the boundaries of that established new system that they're building. But this new movement that did start, I'd say, around Trump, I'd say it even goes back prior to him with things like the Tea Party and so on. That effect that took place with him does symbolize this global shift and this alternative. And folks, here it says this. I'll go into the story now explaining this. It says here that Bill Maher is warning of Trump moving towards a 2024 victory. It says Bill Maher shocks liberal audience with Trump 2024 predictions. And he said, quote, "I hope I scared the expletive out of you." Well, he actually said expletive. That was my change. It says here, and I'll explain why this is significant. HBO show host Bill Maher is warning his audience of a Trump return to office after 2024, saying during a Friday segment, "I hope I scared the expletive out of you." He said Trump and his supporters are putting a slow-moving coup in place to assure victory. Now, the funny thing is, folks, they call people on the right who say this conspiracy theorists. They would call you a Q conspiracy guy if you were suggesting this on the other side. But this is Bill Maher. He's by no means a conservative, right? He said that Trump and his supporters are putting in a slow-moving coup to assure victory. Now, it says this. He says, "I've been saying ever since he lost, he's like a shark that's not gone, just gone out to sea. But actually, he's been quietly eating people this whole time." Quietly eating people this whole time. And by eating people, I mean he's methodically purging the Republican Party of anyone who voted for his impeachment or doesn't agree that he's the rightful leader of the seven kingdoms, which Trump is, again, creating an alternative to the Republican Party within the Republican Party. Trump is remaking the Republican Party from inside the Republican Party, even overtaking the RNC. And again, pushing out a lot of the establishment folks on the Republican side. Bill Maher is not incorrect in suggesting this. Now, he says, President Biden is under extraordinary pressure to do something to stop the coup, as he's calling it, before his authority over the military and Justice Department evaporates at noon of January 20th. Very strange suggestion. He's saying that Biden has to do something with the military and Justice Department to stop Trump. He's saying Biden's under extraordinary pressure to do something to stop the coup, i.e. stop the Trump effect from spreading and basically having Republican victory. In other words, he's suggesting Biden needs to he's under pressure to stop Trump from essentially putting Republicans into place and helping their campaigns and creating this Republican lineup to win. He's suggesting military and Justice Department use. He says again, before his authority over the military and the Justice Department evaporates at noon on January 20th. Now, Maher also says this, President Biden is under extraordinary pressure to do something to stop the coup, right? As I was explaining, he said, what happens when two presidential candidates show up on Inauguration Day, both expecting to be sworn in like a bad sitcom plot? I hope I scared the expletive out of you. And he claimed that Team Trump is methodically, am I saying that right? Putting the right players in place, particularly by purging the GOP of rhinos, Republicans in name only, or others who turned out against him, for example, voting to impeach him, and by endorsing instead loyal secretaries of state who manage elections all over the country. Folks, Trump putting in loyal secretaries of state who manage elections over the country. Those of you who've been worried about the elections, Trump seems to have something working to put in his people in the key parts to oversee the elections across the United States. And Bill Maher is saying this, don't make me be, and I told you so again, you know, I was a young man of 59 when I started using the term slow-moving coup, and it pains me to start having to report it still moving. Now, a few more notes on that. Even the Democrats, several times now, I've mentioned, a few of the times that they've said it publicly, I've mentioned it. Top Democrats are warning. Oh, thank you. Look at you folks teaching me how to speak properly. Methodically. Thank you. Anyways, yeah. Well, we'll make a good, I think we have a good exchange here, folks. You know, I tell you in the news, you teach me to speak proper English, meet each other halfway. We'll benefit through it in the end. Now, keep in mind the broader context of this, though. I'd mentioned before, the Democrats themselves, top people within the Democratic Party, strategists and otherwise, have been warning even Democrat leaders from within the party that they stand to lose control of at least the House of Representatives in the 2022 midterms, let alone the possibility of losing the Senate, which is also a possibility for them. Now, again, part of that is just even redistricting. Again, the census showing population changes. A lot of people left California and New York and other Democrat strongholds and moved to more Republican strongholds, i.e. Texas and Florida. And as that is happening, right? As that is happening, you're seeing again this new shift where, well, frankly, they're losing House seats. If voting dynamics remain exactly the same as before. Oh, thank you, Lisa Bell. All right, I'll learn how to say that properly for y'all. Even if voting dynamics stay exactly the same as they did in the last election, even if it does not change whatsoever, Republicans are set to win control of the House, at least. And of course, if Republicans win both the Senate and the House, they could even impeach Biden if they wanted to. They could do a lot of things. We'll see where this goes, but at the very least, it would mean that they control, at least put a stop to a lot of the agenda being rolled forward under the Biden administration, which a lot of them wouldn't like very much. And also, possibly as well, if Trump is appointing secretaries of state across the United States, let alone state legislatures and otherwise, he could even impact the ways that elections are run across the country, something they don't like, something that Bill Maher is noting and saying could, again, be something that would scare the expletive out of people who like the current system that's in place. Big developments, folks. A lot happening. Trump has been also having his rallies. I've been reporting on it on an ongoing basis. Frankly, YouTube deletes your YouTube will like give you strikes if you post them. But Trump has been holding rallies on an ongoing basis, and at these, he's essentially saying the same general things. He's talking about what he believes was voter fraud. We've shown a lot of evidence of it during the 2020 elections. His mission to basically expose that, overturn a lot of it. Trump seems to be pretty confident that Democrats will lose at least the House in the 2020 elections and probably more. And he seems pretty confident that there's a big Republican win on the horizon, possibly very soon. And frankly, all of this global turmoil, all of these big problems we're seeing with the economy, the possibility of people not getting vaccinated, and folks, I mentioned China's threatening war. Hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops have not yet gotten their vaccines, despite the vaccine mandates, meaning they're either going to be fired or court-martialed or whatever else. All these people who are losing their jobs, who have family members who have lost their jobs otherwise, all of these people are going to be in dire straits and looking for something to get them out of that situation. Now, where do you think the trajectory of that is heading? I'll leave it at that, folks. Again, I do these live Q&As every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So be sure to tune in again this coming Tuesday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, be sure to check out the interviews I've been publishing. I think you'll like a lot of what we're doing. Those are exclusively on Epic TV. We do have some parts of them published on YouTube, not the full things. Also, check out the special features. I have mentioned as well, we have now the Crossroads Book Club, first book of the month. Book of the month for October. Mary Graybar's Debunking the 1619 Project. I'll have some updates to you all soon on how we're going to be managing the book club. I kind of maybe, we're trying to get some systems in place to have discussions. At the very least, I wanted, if it's a current author, maybe we'll try to get them, well, we will try to get them on for like a Q&A at the end of each month. I'll also work out something so we can have some discussions and so on about the book. So first step is to read it. Now, you can get this book from Regnery. If you don't want to purchase from Amazon, get directly from the publisher. That's Mary Graybar's Debunking the 1619 Project, showing a lot of history that is totally forgotten and falsified. Fantastic book to break through what is being falsely taught to students across the United States, what is being falsely taught to businesses. Maybe you have these racial advisory groups coming into your business or your department, wherever you may work, and giving you false information, false takes on history, and other things. Great book to know the arguments against it and to know how to debunk the false claims being spread to you or your children. Again, I'll be discussing a bit more in the book club as we go forward, as we get things in place. But for now, check it out, folks, those of you who want to take part. Also, there's another great video to check out. It's exclusively on Epic TV. American Thought Leaders interviewed author Mike Gonzalez on the Marxist connections of Black Lives Matter. I have the link to that in the description below. Also, I'll show you a trailer in just a bit of that. But as always, folks, again, it does help if you share this video. It does help if you subscribe. And also, if you want to go the extra mile, help us out, you can tell a friend or family member about Epic TV. That said, as always, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.
When you Google Black Lives Matter, Google doesn't take you to a concept. It takes you to the organization founded by Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrice Cullors.
Inside the ideological underpinnings of the Black Lives Matter organizations,
They've all understood that the family needs to be dismantled.
today I sit down with Heritage Foundation's Senior Fellow Mike Gonzalez, author of BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution.
When you separate kids according to affinity groups, that is illegal. That's not allowed by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.